So let's get started, and people can join in. So kia ora koutou. My name, of course, Susan Freeman-Green, tuku ingoa. So my name is Susan Freeman-Green, and I'm the Chief Executive of Local Government New Zealand. And in partnership with Taitua Rā, we're leading the Vote 2022 campaign, which is all about getting people from a range of backgrounds and communities to both stand for election and then vote in October's local elections. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's very enthusiastic at 6:30, but that's excellent. This Make a Stand series, which this session is part of, is all about sharing about how aspiring candidates can campaign in their local elections. And we really hope you find it useful and that there's something that you can take away from these sessions. This is the second one. So ngā mihi nui to our speakers, who are Roy Pilott, who's the one with the water, who is the Editorial Director at the Wanaka Sun and Good Local Media. And then our very own Ranjani Ponnuchetty, who is our Chief Advisor at LDNZ. So welcome both. Both of them have really extensive media and comms expertise at both the local and national levels. So it will be great to hear from them both this session. We're recording it, so it will be available afterwards as well. But fantastic. Can I hand to you first, Roy, please?
Good. Thank you very much for the introduction, Ko Roy Pilott, tōku inga. And look, I suppose just to introduce myself, I am an unashamedly print media person with several decades in the job, and currently looking after two papers in Waipa and, as you mentioned, Susan, Wanaka. So certainly not my first rodeo when it comes to local body elections, and happy to share some thoughts from my perspective about what candidates could do to help themselves get elected, and some of I guess some of the things that I've seen over 30 or 40 years that I've gone, wow, you know, you should have done better there. I'm just wondering if we have any Invercargill mayoral candidates here, because I understand there are more of them than most candidates for other general elections around the place at the moment, from what I'm hearing. But look, I just want to say it's not about me; it's about candidates, and you know, I just think it's an opportunity for people to ask questions. I'm happy to look at issues such as the media scene, what you can expect from media, what you should be doing, how you should be preparing yourself, and maybe just a few views on having seen many candidates for council go along with certain preconceived ideas and being very disappointed and standing down a year or so afterwards, just what you shouldn't expect if you stand for council.
The issue that matter to you, that's what I'm saying.
I missed that.
Might have been someone's background noise.
Okay.
So can I just ask one question? So Roy and then Ranjani, are you happy to sort of facilitate the questions in your own sessions once you talk about that? And I'm going to be on listening but offline, and so Devanga will be your point person if you have any sort of process questions.
Sure.
I think we could just put our hands up virtually and we'll get to all the questions, or just pop your questions in the chat and you can direct it at either of us. And once Roy's done his starter, I will have some tips, and then we'll kind of go to questions maybe.
Sure. Okay. So look, the first thing I would encourage you to do if you're a candidate is to understand your media. Look at where you are, what media is around you, what is available, who can you go and talk to. Do you have community newspapers? Do you have local radio stations? Are you in an area where there's a daily newspaper? And if you do, how active are they in covering local body news? If you have a look at, and I'll be unashamedly biased here, if you have a look at most stuff and NZME community newspapers, the level of coverage that they provide for local body is pretty light, and in some cases almost non-existent. So if you're going along wanting to talk to them about local issues, you may find A, you don't have journalists to talk to, or B, they're not really up with the play. So you do need to understand who around you knows what's going on. You also need to understand where your potential voters are coming from and who your audience are. Who is reading the local papers that you've got? Who is listening to the radio? And to that end, have a look, for example, at how the election is being advertised. And again, I'm a little bit biased on this, but what we know from Elections New Zealand is that they will put all of their advertising into national media. They don't necessarily cover the stories or the issues in your area. So don't just feel obliged to follow the lead that they're taking. Have a good look at who's covering the stories. Go on and obviously digitally go online and see where the debates are. That is probably one of the most important things. So get to know the journalists in your area, introduce yourselves to them, talk to them, see what they can and can't do. You may find they actually don't have the resources or facilities to spend an hour with you talking about your hopes and dreams. And in fact, that will be the case in most examples. You need to do a lot of your own work. And if you're doing your own work and you're sending in statements or comments or what have you, make sure they're checked, make sure they're not written in capital letters. Just some of the things that we tend to get as an editor. I frequently get letters to the editor or statements from candidates written in capital letters. If you write in capital letters, you're shouting at people, and I don't like being shouted at, and I certainly don't have a lot of time for it. So I can tell you where those things generally end up, and they don't help you get votes. Check your emails and respond to them. Check your junk box. One of my roles is editor at the wanakasun.co.nz. That email, unfortunately, even in Wanaka, occasionally goes to people's junk boxes. And people will come back to me and say, Roy, sorry, we missed that last week. So look out for that. We find, certainly at Good Local Media, we cover Cambridge and Te Awamutu with 2 newspapers. We're constantly asking our councillors questions and for their opinions on things, so we email them. It's quite extraordinary, certainly in the early days that we started doing this, how many people didn't respond. If you're elected to a position and you're asked a question by the media, there is an expectation that you will respond. The worst thing you can get is so-and-so did not answer a question. The other thing I would say to you during an election campaign is to have an opinion. Excuse me. One of the common things that I found certainly 3 years ago at the last elections, we would send off questions to candidates, and we would have a significant number of candidates, and they would come back and say, we're not going to answer that question until we find out what our voters want, which is just really weak. It's a way of saying, I'm not prepared to comment. And if you are trying to get people to vote for you and you don't have an opinion on something, you can hardly be seen as somebody that somebody wants to vote for. So when issues come up like Three Waters, when issues come up like the fact they're putting fluoride into your water, when issues come up like the growth of urban areas which is going up instead of out, because that's what the government is asking for, when we're looking at rail versus cycle versus cars on the road, when we're looking at the issue of Māori wards, when we're looking at the fact there are low nomination numbers for this election, all these issues, have an opinion on it. Don't say, well, I don't want to comment. Nobody wants, as I say, nobody wants to vote for somebody who doesn't have an opinion on things. So I guess my message would be that if I was to give you some takeaways, that would be it. Know your media, check your emails, and have an opinion. Over to you, Ranjani.
Thank you very much, Roy. Those are very practical tips and spoken like someone with a lot of experience. Look, I only have 3 or 4 things, and I like to keep it really simple. It's firstly, relationships matter. So back to Roy's point, know your media. So actually phone them, talk to them. And sorry, Paula? Oh, yeah, so call them up, introduce yourself, say you're running, and these are the issues that you really, really care about. So establish those relationships before you need the media. No one likes to be used, especially media. So it's a two-way street. And the second thing from a comms perspective is to really be authentic. Like, don't take a position that you think will make the headlines and then fall away from it through the course of your campaign, because media will see right through it. Thirdly is actually have an angle. It goes back to Roy's point, like have an opinion, right? So, and kind of stepping up from that is to have an angle, you know, pitch yourself, talk about the issues you care about and have an idea of where you want to take the issue. That will often get you a lot more mileage than just having a comment that's opposing something that's going on. And from a comms lens, I suppose, I mean, people really worry about how they present themselves to media, how they speak to media, is it soundbite worthy, etc. That is not your job. That's actually the journalist's job to pick the, you know, it's important to have a good message, to be clear about what you're saying, but you don't have to speak in 15-second sound bites. You can tell your story the way you want to tell it. And that's Roy's job, to, you know, make the story happen the way he wants it to look, sound, and feel. And the last thing is, don't be afraid. I mean, mistakes happen. We all make mistakes, and so do journalists. We sometimes don't exactly say the right thing, and you may come back and go, oh, damn, that was the wrong figure. Oh, call them up. This is why relationships, back to the first point, really matters. Call them up and just go, hey, sorry, I got something wrong. Or, oh, look, I read that story and I don't really think that's what I meant. So I think you've sort of a misrepresentation of what I maybe have said. So, and have it in a really normal conversational way. These are people, they want to do the right thing and they want to get the story right. Like, it is very rare in all of my career to find a journalist that doesn't want to get it right. So these are just normal people. Establish yourself and your position. You talk about the issues you really care about, and feel free to have a conversation about something if it's not quite right after you've done an interview or, you know, published your story or whatever. That's it.
Sure.
Simple.
Relationships, just following on from that, if you're standing, you know, and I appreciate people will be watching this later. If you're standing for mayor, you can expect your local paper to take an interest in you in terms of asking questions. If you are one of 30 people standing for your district council, you can't necessarily expect that your local media is going to come to you and ask you anything. There is a strong possibility, if you're living in some areas where you don't have an active media, they may do nothing. You might get one email. Be aware of that, because I can tell you I've gone through a lot of elections where I have actually seen, even when I was at the Waikato Times and we were quite active, I've seen candidates go through an entire campaign and not make any contact with the local paper. And I sit there and I go, you've paid your money, you've put your hand up to stand for council, you're bringing certain skills to the table, but one of the skills that you're not showing is being able to communicate. And it's really important that you do that. Don't be disappointed if you find that your local paper is not going to do a story announcing the dramatic news that you're standing for council. They might not be interested in the slightest because you're one of 20 perhaps. They will be interested if you've got something to say that's something a bit different. So that's one of the points I was making. if we move to giving advice, I would also just going on the basis of my experience, don't be a single issue candidate. I can tell you, I have seen a lot of single issue candidates who've gone along because they want to sort one thing out. And they're often very popular people. They're often people who are well known in the community. They get elected, they spend 18 months on council, and they go, you know what, I can't do what I wanted to do. I'm a failure, I'm going to stand down. Which brings to point two, know what you're getting into. It's unfortunate that many people stand for council, don't actually do some basic work to see what can be achieved, how the system works, and what they can and can't do. And you can't change the world. I can assure you, if you're a first-term councillor coming in, having never sat on council, you are not going to change the world from your council. You might influence, you might change opinions, and you might move the council a certain way. But if you have an idea that you're going to do a full investigation into the finances of the council over the last 5 years, including how much the mayor was paid, it ain't going to happen. So, you know, don't think that you can change the world, and just make yourself aware of what the council is doing and what it can and can't do. If that means getting time to go and sit and talk to somebody, even the chief executive, you know, maybe that's worthwhile doing. Which brings me to point three: be aware of what's happening in your community. What are the issues, and what are your views on it? Ranjani.
Look, I just want to pick up on one thing, and we must throw to questions because I'm sure you guys have questions, but just in terms of the whole have a say on things, and, you know, I think this is where it's important to actually have press releases. Like, people aren't going to know that you've got something to say unless you tell them, especially when you're in this media sphere of, you know, when media's under-resourced, overworked, not doing local body politics, not getting into the nitty-gritty. So you have your say by actually putting out a press release in a timely way. If there's an issue going on, putting out a press release 2 days later, too bad, babes, it's gone. So, you know, like, this goes to the point around, don't be a single issue candidate, because then you need to be across all the issues in your community and actually have a position on them, and possibly some solutions, because that's what progresses you from, you know, just I don't agree with it, to something else. And that's where you get the most mileage, because often you can lead the conversation. So then you can become actually the headline the next day, rather than just a comment in today's story. And the other thing I was just going to say is that from an LGNZ perspective, we have a number of resources, you know, like we've got the candidates guide and things like that. So please have a look at the resources that LGNZ has. Devanga, who organizes all of these things and does a brilliant job and helps everyone out, will be able to put that in the chat, I think. She basically runs the whole show and has organized the Zoom, so she'll put that in the chat. So I think that's basically my tip around how to be heard, right? Because it's very hard for people to know that you actually have a say and it's worthy of hearing you. So Rob Scott's got a question. What's a good length for a press release? What do you think? I mean, I think it just has to be quite simple. A 1 page, 400 words.
Yeah. So your press release, in all probability, will be taken down to 1 sentence if it's part of a story. It's unlikely your press release, unless you have got a real scoop, is going to be the crux or the basis of a story. It'll be an addition to a story. So let's talk, for an example, about Three Waters. So somebody's made an observation about Three Waters, or there's some discussion around it. You would like to have your name in that story. So you would like to have a sentence where you say X, Y, Z. So 200 words, they're going to pluck out 1 sentence. The key is that you've got something that you're saying that is significant. There's no point in trying to formulate a book you're looking at a short, sharp soundbite. So you're not going to get 400 words printed, but I would say this. If you are going to take your press release and put it on your own Facebook page, then keep it to 200, 250 words so people can read it, and then circulate it. Make the most value of your press release. You don't just want to send it to one place. You need to send it to all the media that you think are going to cover this story in your readership area. But you're obviously going to be on board with your own Facebook page where you're promoting your own stuff. So 200 words, I think, is fine. You don't need to overthink it. But again, I go back to it, get it proofread. You don't want to have capitals. You don't want to have spelling errors. You want to have it clean. And if that means going and spending some money on somebody in comms like me, because I do a number of jobs, then do it.
And actually, I think in terms of press releases, speed matters. So if it's a statement, if you just want to send 3 lines and it's in quotes and it's a statement, and that will get you to where you need to be in the story, do it. It's better than, you know, spending a day crafting your amazing press release and then the story's already published, right?
Yeah.
James, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I had a question about what happens if someone misrepresents you. So, for example, they might write a letter to the editor where they misquote you or misunderstand your position, or just be a bit malicious, frankly. Is it worth correcting it, or does that just highlight the views a little bit more, or just let it go? Or what's your view on that?
James, it really depends on the circumstances. If somebody has, you will often find, as an editor, I get a significant number of letters that I will bounce and send back to the author and go, you've actually got it wrong, because we've got a fair idea of what has been said in the first place. So it's not unusual for me to send a letter back and say, you've actually misrepresented what the guy said, rewrite your letter. You would expect that sort of stuff would not get through if you've made a statement which is in the public domain. So if it does get through, 2 things. Is it serious? Does it cause you any damage? Does it turn you into a moaner if you start complaining about it? Or is it worth saying, here is actually my position spelled out quite clearly? You probably have to look at it case by case. As I say, I think you're going to have to accept in an election debate, people are going to, you know, if they're not voting for you or they're supporting another side, sometimes you do get into a bit of a battle, and people, you know what politics are like, they can get like that. So you've got to take it as it comes, I guess, and make a decision on that.
Okay, thank you.
When I think about those sort of stuff in my comms jobs, I often think, is it worth it? Is it actually going to make it better? And is there something actually wrong with the statement, or is it just a personal grief? Like, if it just upsets you, then I often think it's not worth it. But if it's actually incorrect, you will always be able to get that changed. No reporter, no editor wants incorrect statements about an issue printed. But if it's just a little, you know, a little hurtful, kind of misrepresented, then you're only amplifying that voice by going around and around in circles.
I'll give you an example of not just a letter to the editor, but an example of what could happen. You get interviewed by someone, James, and the reporter writes, this is going to be one of your priorities. Okay, and you go and have a look and you go, actually, it's actually not one of my priorities. I don't know why they said that. So here you've got a dilemma, because do you actually want to stand up and say this is not a priority? And it's one of those scenarios. I think we call it, are you still beating your wife syndrome? And I'm sorry if that's an inappropriate thing, but it's an old one in journalism. And basically, whatever answer you give is going to leave you in a very unfortunate position. And I'm sorry if that was an inappropriate, and it probably was. And you'll have to excuse me. In journalism, we tend to there can be some that is sometimes we use the extreme things to explain to journalists why something is right or why it's wrong. But that's a sort of a classic example of where somebody writes something and says, this is going to be your priority. And you look at it and you go, well, it's actually not. So as soon as you say it's not your priority, it suddenly becomes an issue with people who think it should be. And you now have to explain why it's not one of your priorities. So in a rather ham-fisted way, and apologies if I've got that wording rather inappropriate, but I hope I've got my point across.
Yeah, I think that's good. Thank you.
Wendy, did you?
Yeah, kia ora. I just had a question. You made a comment before about circulating sort of wide and far press releases and whatnot, trying to get them out to all the local media. I've been in a situation in the past where actually our local daily paper has taken offence when I forwarded a press release onto other media sources locally, and I've had quite a dressing down from a reporter in the past. So I'm just kind of interested to understand how you think that scenario should be managed. Like, do I need to specifically mention in my press release I have forwarded it to these parties? Like, what's the best way of trying to, I guess, avoid almost getting blacklisted by the local media?
Did you have an agreement with that local media that you're going? Okay,
No.
I think you need a conversation with the editor.
Okay, cool.
That's weird. Press releases go to like literally 400 to 500 people from my perspective.
Yeah, okay, good. All right, that's unusual.
It might just be a young, enthusiastic, someone. Yeah, I don't know, Roy. How would you deal with it?
Okay, so in an election phase, nobody gets exclusive statements from candidates.
No.
It just doesn't happen. At any other time of the year, if I receive if somebody sends me some copy and I think this is a really great story, I might go to them and say, have you circulated this to anyone else? And the reason I ask that is because I look and I might say, this is a cracking story. And if nobody else has got it, I might put this on page 3 or 5. But if I know everybody else has got it and they're going to come out a day ahead of us and I'm filling my pages right now, it's going to go further back, because who wants to have yesterday's story on your front page? But in terms of statements that you are releasing on issues, no. You are looking to get publicity for your views, and do not be intimidated by any journalist telling you, well, you've given it to somebody else, so we won't cover you. No, that's simple as that.
Donna has got a question around the rules around signs and things. Sorry, is that sort of campaign, like how to run the campaign in terms of where you put your signage and things, right?
Sorry, it's probably a little bit off topic, but I just wonder where we find kind of the rules around things.
You go to your council, and they have quite clear rules and regulations on the size of the sign, where it can go, when it can be put up, and so you're in election mode now. So you can put them up now, but your council will tell you exactly what you can and can't do.
And there'd be a local electoral officer that you can contact.
Ah, okay. Yeah. Thank you.
You have your own. Each individual council runs their own elections. So it's different across the country.
Okay. Hey, thanks a lot.
That's all right. Just one thing I wanted to say with Wendy's question is this. I think, again, I cannot stress the importance of relationships. So that's why we need to, know the journalists, because then you can just go back and go, hey, what was with the misunderstanding? I don't think it's weird to sort of. So I think, while I suggested the editor, I think you always talk to the journalist first, talk through the misunderstanding, and then if they don't get it, then we just talk to the journalist, the editor, to go, hey, I'm not sure how your organization operates, but it's normal for us to send a press release to a number of people. So there was a misunderstanding with your journalist. I certainly hope it doesn't reflect in your reporting, and make that clear that it shouldn't reflect in their reporting, whatever's gone on personally there.
So in this case, you may have a situation where you've got two papers competing for news, and that's something to your advantage, not to your disadvantage. They both want to report what you've got. It's not unheard of for in that sort of situation for one to try and heavy hand and say, well, if you don't give it to us first, we won't cover you, and you won't get on our website. Don't be intimidated by that. I wonder whether for candidates, whether it's appropriate or timely just to go through what has happened to the media landscape in recent years. Because if we go back to 2 generations or so, every town had their local newspaper, which had 3 or 4 journalists who covered all the meetings, who you could go and interview, who would come and interview you, and you would get stories done in the paper. And today you have a situation where those same mastheads don't actually carry any local news at all. They simply take the the nearest story to your area that's appeared in the daily paper equivalent that they have, and all the rest of the copy is common. That is a fallout, obviously, from the time when the internet arrived. The news started to go online, and papers made a decision. Certainly, NZME and Stuff made a decision to go digital first. And the view behind that was that the days had gone where papers decided when and where you would read the news. They decided that the reader should decide that. So they now put a lot of news on every platform they can find, which makes a lot of sense in one way, but of course does have some downsides to it. And I guess the biggest downside is what it has done to print, because people now pick up papers and go, well, I've read all of those stories online already. And as a result of that, I guess a lot of advertisers have looked at that and said, well, there's, the value of me advertising in print has gone down as well. The fact is that print still has a huge following, and people still read the paper. And it's something that people tell me all the time, that, even though they can go and get news online, it's still great to be able to pick up the paper and read the local news. If you've got a paper that's covering local news, it's invaluable, and it's certainly worth being in. So you will probably find that there is a strong drive, if you're looking and getting advice on advertising and what have you, to go digital. But don't underestimate the power of print. Those newspapers still sit around the home for a few days, and they still get read. Stephen, are you asking?
Yeah, could I just ask a question, guys, if I may? I'm from sunny downtown Rangiora. Can you just explain to me the part that local democracy, which I've heard is an entity that sort of covers a lot of this stuff, what part they play in the media landscape?
Roy, did you want to do that, or do you want me to?
We're not involved with local democracy reporting. It is rather selective, so I shall leave that with you.
So local democracy reporting is something that the government funds. Basically, they are all based in the regional newsrooms. So they might work for, Greymouth Star, or, individual newsrooms. And I think there's about 15 of them across the country. And it's part of a wider mentoring program that Radio New Zealand runs. And the program's quite new, so I'm sure there's lots of work to do and things like that. And at LGNZ, we are trying really hard to equip them with the right skills, to give them the wider context, all that sort of stuff. So, and it ranges, the local democracy reporters range in experience, capability, care for their round that they've got, and that sort of stuff. So that's basically where it sits. But the important thing to remember is that they actually have a national platform, which is the Radio New Zealand website.
Right, because when I look at our local papers, a lot of the political sort of media coverage is under that banner, if that makes sense. So it suggests to me that if you're a candidate, it's probably one of those relationships you'd want to be building, I would have thought, at a local level.
Absolutely, because if you're then voted in, then you must have those relationships already established. You're in a far better position if you do.
Good stuff. Thanks, guys. Appreciate that.
Any more questions? No. Oh, Wendy, is that from a previous question or is that a new question?
New question, if that's all right.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Just interested to understand how you deal with negative situations with the media. So I'm running for re-election to council. So I've done my first term, and in the first election,
Baggage.
Yeah, you got it. Baggage. And also in the first election, there was quite a bit of sort of dirty politics, dirty media play, which I, as a first term councillor, had no idea how to manage. And I'm just really interested to get maybe some thoughts, some war stories, some opinions on how you manage negative media situations.
Define negative media situation. Well, give me
well, I'll give you a real world example, because it was all very out there and in the media, which is we had someone on our council who was leaking public excluded information to the media, twisting it because of course it wasn't in the public domain yet, so they could do their bend on it however they liked. The media then started coming at all current elected members saying, you know, where do you stand on this? And of course it was all in public excluded, so we couldn't talk about it. And so certain parties were using that to their benefit because they were freely talking about it. And it just started snowballing a little bit in terms of, oh, well, clearly you're hiding things from the community, Yep. And so for me, it was in that scenario, and I know a number of other elected members did the same thing. We just had to not comment because we actually legally couldn't. But it did put us in a precarious situation leading into the election.
Did anybody raise a code of conduct over it?
We did a formal investigation because, of course, how do you prove who leaked?
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, the outcome of that was inconclusive. However, it was fairly obvious, but no formal code of conduct was brought against the individual because we couldn't prove it. It's always
a difficult one. You did the right thing. You can't comment. You legally can't comment. If I was doing your comms, I would be challenging the media to reveal the source. I would be telling them we've got X number of councillors. These councillors have already told you they won't comment. Why don't you reveal who is breaching this and challenge them to it? So my comments to every time they rang and they asked a question, I'd be saying, why don't you stand up and say who has leaked the information to you? Because you know that this councillor is clearly in breach of what he or she has signed when they became a councillor. So I'd be saying, what is the greater sin here? Yeah, and for sometimes you can try and deflect, if you like, the issue of this councillor won't comment on this issue, to actually turning it round and saying, we have a malcontent in our ranks who is clearly leaking information to you. Why don't you expose them? That's the sort of thing I would probably challenge them to do. It's never nice. Nobody really wins out of it. But that's probably the best advice I would have given you. Okay, no, that's great. Thank you. I'm just, again, like, if there are any kind of war stories or just anything like that you can share with us, that would be really good to understand too. Not necessarily only the positive stuff, because we do, whether we're elected or not, we are probably going to have to deal with a little bit of gameplay in the build up to the election. So it's just interesting to understand your professional view on how to handle tricky situations. You have to understand that we have two papers in Waiapa, the Cambridge News and the Te Wamutu News. Our team doesn't have any local democracy reporters. We have two pensioners, one near pensioner and one first year journalist, and we're probably the best community paper in the country. when there are council meetings, we have a journalist in Mary Ann Gill, who's probably the best community newspaper journalist in the country, who will know what all councillors are doing. I think the message I would give you is that it is better to have an informed media than an uninformed media. It is better that the media, even when you're going behind closed doors for some discussions, that the media is informed to a degree, because a little bit of knowledge can be a dangerous thing, and simply reading off an agenda and writing from that, there's a good reason why most of that stuff is in committee. Although that said, I don't agree with the move to workshops over the last 20 years. I think that has just killed any debate in council meetings, stone dead. But certainly, look, in my time, I jokingly said when I was doing the Hamilton City Council round, the council had a meeting one evening. They came out, I spoke to the chairman. He said, we have all agreed that we will not discuss how we have voted with the media. And I said, that's fine. I phoned every councillor up. Not one councillor told me which way they voted or which way anybody else had voted. But by the end of the night, I knew which way everybody had voted. A journalist knows how to ask questions and how to get information. So no councillor breached any confidentiality at all, but a good journalist will work that out. So in terms of dealing with in committee things, it's often better to simply sit down with a journalist and say, this is what we're doing. You can go off the record with journalists. It's a difficult one. I tutor at Wintec, tutor journalism at Wintec, and I cover this with them. It can be difficult, and at a certain time, if a journalist is sitting there, he or she may go, no, we're not going off the record on this one now. I'm not going to compromise myself and ruin a good story. But often it is worthwhile to inform a journalist to say, this is what's happening. This is the time frame. We can work with you on that.
Just one thing about the sort of war stories, and when you've kind of come in with a little baggage, I do feel like there is never a bad time to reset a relationship. So again, you know, if there is an opportunity to kind of go, look, that's happened. There are a bunch of things that I probably can't go into, but you can, you know, talk to these people or whatever, or, you know, every context is different in terms of like resetting relationships. But like, I think people just want stories. Seriously, journalists want stories. So if you can give them something, they'd probably think quite highly of you, especially as a candidate, because usually they don't have many stories.
So another thing to think about is that you may often find that the resources of the paper that you want to get a story done is not particularly great. So I look after Wanaka. I news edit it from Tamahiri, and I'm currently doing it without any journalists. So you can imagine how much time I have, given it's one of 3 papers that I'm doing, to actually interview and write. Virtually nil. Some papers will be looking for opportunities to, or will be crying out for copy, which is of good quality, which gives them a story that they can do a quick sub-up job and run. So again, this is what I was talking about earlier on, about identifying your media, knowing what media you have, what newspapers you have, how they're resourced, and how you can take advantage or make the most of your media. As I say, ringing them up and saying, I'd like someone to come and spend an hour with me to talk about the stormwater issue that I've seen in Banks Road this afternoon, is not going to happen. But if you were to be able to write something and say, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I think we should do, potentially you're going to see that story appear. In a daily paper, of course, that doesn't apply. But many of you will be in smaller communities where you may be able to make use of your skills, or your the skills of whoever is working with you to get some copy through.
Can I just talk a little bit about, we've talked a lot about local media, and that's really important because that's where candidates will likely get airtime. Sorry, there are a couple of local questions that I think Devanga's answering, so I'll leave that to her to pop it in the chat. In terms of like broad and like national media and that sort of stuff, I do think don't exclude them because you want to stay fully local. The internet, all this sort of stuff gives you this opportunity to have your say on a national issue and be able to share it locally through your own, social media, that sort of stuff. So don't exclude it. Like, I mean, if there is something interesting that you want to have your say in, or you have experience, a lot of the time, like, let me give you an example. Say, and I'm sorry that it's about Three Waters, I've just been like thinking about it. So, say you're an engineer of 20 years, right? And you have an opinion on Three Waters, that will matter to national media. So, so it's all about knowing your background, knowing yourself, knowing how it relates to conversations that are being had nationally, because so many local issues are actually nationwide issues: housing, transport, infrastructure, that well-being element that councils are really getting into and are so good at, that sort of stuff. There are RMA reforms, all that sort of thing will make it into the national media if it's pitched the right way, actually. Yeah. We've got 9 minutes.
I was going to say, we've done 50 and we've done
Either
pretty well.
we wrap it up here, or have we got any other last questions? I don't want to keep people for longer than they need to be here for. I'll scroll through. Nope, that's cool. All righty.
I guess the only thing I'll finish off with is this series was called Make a Stand. And I encourage you to do that as candidates. Don't be timid, don't be quiet, make a stand, make some noise, be heard, and have your say. And I applaud you for all putting your hands up to stand for election.
Thank you very much, Roy, especially. Oh, Susan's back.
No, I've been listening in, and I really just wanted to thank you both and Devanga. It's really, I think the group that is online have been really lucky to get some really practical insights and tips and thoughts and perspectives from people who are hugely experienced in this field. So thank you both very much for that.